Howie is the apology I owe the loudest to, even though the doubt was probably the briefest and least renowned. Everybody knows, well-documented doubts about Sirianni and the things for good and for bad I've said about Jalen. Howie, I didn't like the fact that when I called him a mock draft GM, what I said was Howie Roseman's drafts are very best player available-y, and they very often, best player available is the mock draft consensus best player. And so what would happen after the drafts is all of the people who did mock drafts, Howie agreed with a lot of them, would draft said player, and then everyone would be like, Howie Roseman crushed it again. And I thought it was a little tail wagging the doggish. However, whether that just means that's the right way to draft, whether it means my analysis was off, whatever it means, that guy has built 3 distinct Super Bowl contenders and 2 Super Bowl champions. Did it with Carson, rebuilt it on the fly with a totally different defense 2 years ago with Jalen Hurts, and did it this year. And so I think he has earned the claim of being the second best GM in the entire NFL. So absolutely, Howie Roseman. He also, seemingly it was him that picked, because we know it wasn't Sirianni, that picked Kellen Moore and more importantly, Vic Fangio. And Vic Fangio just painted his masterpiece. So Howie, full credit.
Right after their defense,
now Sirianni,
a huge question like the year before.
Yeah, last year the worst defense in football.
Yeah.
Worst defense in football. It turned around with a lot of this, and Howie's 2 rookies played great. Quinion Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. They brought in Zach Bond. He almost won Defensive Player of the Year. Vic was unbelievable. Jalen Carter, who was a risky top 10 pick, was the second best D tackle in football, arguably, this year. So, honest to God, full credit. Full credit. Sirianni. I might just not know what football players will relate to from a head coach. So coaches that I have been, 3 of the coaches that I have been most skeptical of in the last 5 years. Dan Campbell, after the bite the knees press conference.
Why does everybody hate that?
The bite the kneecaps or what I'm just being honest. My reaction was, okay. There's like meathead and then there's whatever this is. Turns out he's like the sharpest analytics guy in the world. His players would kill for him. He's awesome. My snap reaction was wrong. Second one, Joe Mazzulla. It's like this dude's talking about the floor tasting like blood. He's watching The Town. It was 16 times. He's just like, what is going on? He got elevated to a position he wasn't ready for. He's awesome. And his players love him. Then there's Sirianni, who probably had the single worst opening press conference ever, where he seemed very unsure of himself and almost timid. It feels to me like he then overcorrected and was like, essentially, I'm just going to embrace every South Philly stereotype there ever has been and be brash and kind of provocative in these things. But again, wins are a coaching stat. And this team consistently wins. He just won a Super Bowl where his team played one of the best games any team has played in a Super Bowl in 40 years. He has to get credit. He has to be considered one of the 5 or 6 best coaches in football. It's not fair to elevate Kevin O'Connell, who I like a lot, but has accomplished nothing, above Sirianni. It's not right. Fair is fair. So even if, from a personality standpoint, I don't get it, they just won 16 of 17 games. The one loss, their quarterback got hurt. They blew out a team in the NFC Championship game and blew out a team trying to be the greatest team of all time in the Super Bowl. Guys been to the playoffs all 4 years. They've had 2 awesome playoff runs. Like, he gets the credit. And then there's Jalen, who, would you have, Demonze, and be honest with me here. Like, you're not going to you're not make me mad, hurt my feelings. Would you have described me as a Jalen Hurts hater or a Jalen Hurts skeptic? If you were only given those 2 options. Like, and again, you can...
Yeah, I'd say you're a Lamar Jackson hater. As far as Jalen Hurts, I'd see it as a skeptic.
So, it's so funny you say that. Because I obviously... I shouldn't say obviously at this point, but I have always thought Lamar is a better player than Jalen. But I've also thought the way I've talked about Lamar and holding him to an MVP standard and the doubt and the Aaron Judge and James Harden stuff and the choking in big games, calling me a Lamar Jackson hater, certainly compared to the rest of the media, I think was totally fair. I never would have considered myself a Jalen Hurts hater. I thought that on the line graph of Jalen Hurts opinions in the media, mine is somewhere in like the 35th percentile. Like, I probably was a little more critical of him than the average media member, but certainly not the most, and certainly not a guy that I spent a lot of time going after. I just was kind of matter of fact that, hey, I think the guy does a lot of things well, but I don't really trust him as a drop back passer. He had that unbelievable game in the Super Bowl 2 years ago. I haven't seen him do it again since. To use the Barkley terms, he's a bus rider, not a bus driver. Like, those are things I've said. And I'll get to his performance in this game in a moment. But I have to give you that setup for this story. So, Saturday night Clutch Sports party at Brennan's in New Orleans. And it's me, your mom, Demonze, again, for the new audience members, be like, you're hanging out with your co-host mom? That's also my wife. And your mom's best friend, your Aunt Nicole. And as is always the case at every party I've ever been to with your mother, particularly when it's your mother and Nicole, we're in there less than 5 minutes, and they have been invited into a section to sit down because their feet hurt and because they're beautiful women and they're just, pretty privilege, I think it's called. Yeah. And so, and the people whose section it is, it's, basically say, hey, you can come in, but I don't, it's not, it's not really my thing. Like, I'm not going to, there's limited seat space. There's all, the even at a party like this, when the drinks are free, those are your bottles. I think I'm not going to be standoffish. I'm not going to be rude, but I'm not crossing the rope, so to speak. You know what I mean? And also, I want to move around the room. I know a lot of people there. I get my own drinks and whatever. But they're hanging out there for an hour and a half. I'm moving back and forth, say hi to my agent, say hi to other people, or not argue, but, Philly fans come up to me and they're like, oh, man, we're going to kill you tomorrow. And I say, man, I hope you enjoy tonight because tomorrow is going to be the worst day of your life. Little did I know. You know what I mean? I'm having a good time.
Little did I.
Couple hours into the night, another context for it. There's a UFC fight on, the big Strickland pay-per-view. And it's on, I should have said this. This is Clutch Sports Party partnered with DraftKings. It's DraftKings Clutch Sports Party. So they have a giant video board playing the fight. And where your mom was sitting was like the perfect spot to watch the fight. And I was into the fight. So once the fight started, I moved over to where I'm standing right outside the section watching this fight. And I stand there. You know how I watch non-Chiefs sporting events. I just stand totally still, arms crossed, like kind of looking, I don't know, crazy is the wrong word, but I'm just like, I'm intensely watching the event. And so I'm just standing there silently watching the event. But I've now been standing there for probably, it's 5-minute round, 5-round fight. I watched the whole thing standing right there. So I just standing there silently for a half hour. Not really thinking, just whatever. Right after the fight ends, this woman comes up to me who was sitting in the same section but across from your mom and says, I would like to ask you a question. I'm like, sure, of course. And she said, why do you talk so bad about Jalen Hurts? And I said, I don't know. I don't know that that's fair. And she was like, yes, it is. You always talk bad about him. And I was like, well, I have questions about his ability as a drop back passer. It's my opinion. Like, I don't think I've ever been personal. I've ever been unfair. Basically agree to disagree. And she's not having it. Now, she's incredibly polite, but very adamant that I have been unfair and I don't even know if inaccurate, but unfair about my Jalen Hurts commentary. So I'm like, okay, hey, we can certainly have this conversation, because if it were, again, this is me showing kind of just how my brain works. If it were a guy, particularly a guy my age or younger, I'd have quickly been like, hey, man, agree to disagree, whatever. But because it was a woman, and a woman that I perceived to be older than me, I felt like I have an obligation here to be uber respectful and to just, if you really want to have this conversation, we can have this conversation. And so I'm like, let me tell you the good things I've said about Jalen. She's like, no, I'm not talking about that. I'm like, well, no, let me paint you the full picture, right? Let me paint you the full picture. So I list that the first time we ever talked about him was when he got benched in college and how well I thought he dealt with that. About, I go through a bunch of stuff. I was like, and now, let me tell you, I think the single most critical thing I've ever said about Jalen, that is probably what you were sent or you've seen or whatever. I was like, I called him the weak link of the Eagles offense. I was like, and I know that sounds awful. I was like, but I believe the Eagles have a top 2 offensive line, a top 2 receiving core, a top 2 running back. So even if I think Jalen is a top 10 quarterback, that would make him the weak link. And she still is like, usually like, I'm a little charming. I feel like I'm, making the case, whatever. Not really having it. And then I realized something I should have realized much earlier in the conversation. And I said, ma'am, may I ask you a question? She said, yes. I said, are you Jalen Hurts' mother? And she said, yes, I am.
Yep.
And I was like, oh, man. I was like, and I told her, and I was like, listen, you're putting me in a brutal spot. She was like, I don't know, again, I don't want to misquote her at all. I don't know if she said, what do you mean, or no, I'm not, or whatever. I was like, because now that I know you're his mother, what I should do is just say, I'm sorry for everything I've ever said, or, I'm playing a character, or, it's my job, whatever it is. I was like, but if I have any hope of you having any respect for me after this, I feel like I have to show you I do believe what I say. I try to never be personal, and that we're, you know what I mean? We might just have a difference of opinion on certain things. And so, like, if you want to continue this conversation, I will do it. Like, but ultimately, I'm not trying to, have a weird thing here. And she was like, no, I want to talk. And so we talked for, I don't know, another 10 minutes. And at some point, a guy came over, and I think it might have been Jalen's dad, but I'm not certain. He didn't say anything in the conversation except for the fact that somehow Houston came up, and he knew who you were. So Jalen's dad was coached at Channelview. Yeah, I mean, somehow like that came up, and I kind of remember. I do remember. I said, I was like, listen, I was like, my son played high level basketball, nothing like what your son is playing. I was like, but I was like, my son and Jalen, I think, are the exact same age. It's like, I was like, and I watched my son, play, trying to, get a college scholarship, play high level basketball. And the guy standing there, he's like, yeah, I remember. He's like, you lived in Sugarland. Your son played at Sugarland, or your son played in Sugarland. And so that just, now that I'm kind of piecing the night together, I'm like, maybe that was Jalen's dad or just family, because they're from Houston. You guys would have been in high school at the same time.
At the same time, yeah.
Right. And so all that would have made sense. And so the reason I even brought it up was I was like, I know how parents watch their kid, and then I know how the world watches their kid. Like, it's probably not going to be the exact same thing, whatever it is. And then, you don't have to give the entirety of the conversation. She obviously just thinks I'm wrong, which is what a mother should think. And she thinks Jalen doesn't get enough credit for a lot of the stuff that doesn't show up in the box score, which is totally fair. But I tell this long story because it's an unbelievable story, but also because for the ending of it, which is, she says, what are you going to say when he wins? And I was like, well, she goes, not if, when he wins. And I was like, well, you're not going to like this answer. It's like, but I'm just going to be honest with you. I can't tell you what I'm going to say about a game before I see how the game is played. I was like, and just knowing that they won doesn't tell me enough about how he played for me to be able to tell you what I will say. It's like, what I will guarantee you is this. If they win, I won't criticize him on Monday. It's like, I can guarantee you that. What's never happened is team wins the Super Bowl as an underdog against one of the greatest teams ever, and I'm like, man, their quarterback wasn't good. It's like, I can promise you I won't criticize him. I was like, I can't promise you I'm going to give him the level of praise you would want me to before I see the game. And again, I don't think she loved the answer. But I was like, listen, agree, this is what it is. And she was incredibly gracious and a very sweet woman. And then I shook the other guy's hand. Then another guy came over, guy your age, maybe a little younger. And he came over and I put out to shake his hand. And I said, hey, what's your name? And he was not of the mood of the other participants. He was like, doesn't matter what my name is. I was like, okay, got it. No problem. I was like, I'm Nick. Nice to meet you. Like, I don't know if this is Jalen's cousin. I don't know who it was. But I got serious cousin vibes. And so I'm like, okay, you know what I mean? This has gone about as well as it could have gone, all things considered.
Takes you and get you grabbed up.
Yeah. And so that was that. So I tell all that story to now answer the question. What am I going to say? And what I'm going to say is, after that performance, I have had a top 5 quarterbacks list of Mahomes, Allen, Burrow, Lamar, Stafford pretty consistently over the last 3 years. There's been movement 2 through 5, but that's basically been my list. And that has been on the back of Matt Stafford's inclusion there has been because, man, guy kicked ass in a Super Bowl, won a Super Bowl. How many Super Bowl champion quarterbacks still playing well are there? Like, it's him, Mahomes, and then Russell, who's different player, Rodgers, different player, Brady's gone. Like, winning a Super Bowl really matters a lot. Winning a Super Bowl in part because you played great. And playing great in multiple Super Bowls has to matter a lot. So what I'll say is Jalen Hurts now deserves to be just considered one of the 5 best quarterbacks. Even if you have questions about his down-to-down drop-back passing ability, as I still do, he's a big game player. He's an incredibly tough player. He's a leader that deals with a very tough personality in AJ, an eccentric head coach. He never causes any problems or distractions for his team. He agrees to continually run the tush push, and that's a brutal play that really is so valuable to them. And he just thoroughly outplayed Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl and beat him. And he also, the guy who I had there, Matt Stafford, he beat him in a game that Stafford played well, but Stafford made the big mistake and Jalen didn't with the fumble. So fair is fair. Like, it's not right to just say Justin Herbert at this point is better than Jalen Hurts. It's not. Like, the arm talent is one thing. Like, that's not everything that has to do with playing quarterback in this league. And he played great in the conference championship game. He played great in the Super Bowl for the second time. He had one turnover the whole playoff run. He stepped up in the biggest moments. He's earned that. Flatly, he's just earned that.